3, 2. Oh, it might be already starting. So Eric or Henry start.
Polygon episode number 57 for this Friday, May 1st, 2015, and I just looked outside and it's finally clearing up here. It has been raining, I wouldn't say it's been raining non-stop here, but it's been raining here and there, and it's good to finally see some cloud cover. See, the thing we've had here the past 3 weeks is every Friday, the work week is all nice and clear. It's like 60-degree temperatures. It's so nice outside, and then you hit Friday, and bam, rain comes. So I mean, that's just Iowa weather. And Saturday tomorrow's actually looking to be really nice, so I'm looking forward to that. Jeff, how's it looking?
Right now, it looks fine. Who knows what's going to end up being?
Yeah. How's it looking down in your neck of the woods, Jeff?
Cloudy. It hasn't rained today. I've seen a lot of what I would consider virga around. Lots of dark clouds looking like it's going to rain, and then it doesn't. It's been here and there, some sun, but mainly a lot of clouds. It started out really nice this morning, and then just clouded over, and it was kind of lousy. I mean, it wasn't bad. You could go outside and do stuff. You probably had to take a jacket, because I did when I was out and about today. So, but unlike our guest, he had nice weather today.
It was beautiful in beautiful Youngstown, Ohio today. We had sunshine, a high of 67. It was 2 above average, and when we can say it's above average here, we are really happy after the kind of winter we just had.
Yeah, that means we won't like him.
Yeah.
Except I'd say that we've had some really nice weather the last, what would you say, Henry? Probably since April 1st. It's actually been, we've had very few cold days.
April has been relatively quiet.
Outside of the interesting, the little tornado episode on the 9th, it's been dead quiet for severe weather in this part of the country. Can't say the same for like Texas, the plains, and some of the South, but
yeah, Texas saw like multiple days with slight risks, along with a moderate risk in there. They had a good.
They've been in a drought, especially Oklahoma. The best thing about all this rain and stormy weather down there is they're finally getting rain. The bad thing about it is, and Eric could even mention this too for where he is in eastern Ohio, western Pennsylvania, that sometimes, especially in the spring and summer, when you're going to get rain, unfortunately, it comes in the form of thunderstorms that can be strong to severe, and you take the good with the bad. And they say that in Oklahoma and Texas, that when it comes to springtime, the rains are going to come, but unfortunately, so is all the bad stuff, et al. Tornadoes. So.
Yeah, exactly. Thankfully, over here, we haven't had really any severe weather yet this spring. We had one day with a couple of severe thunderstorm warnings. That was pretty much it. It's been a pretty quiet spring so far.
And I suppose and we're kind of going off base already, I suppose with severe thunderstorm warnings, you have to interrupt and go freaking out and saying, "Oh, there's a severe thunderstorm warning, and there could be quarter-sized hail heading for Newcastle. The world is ending. You will all die," or something like that.
Well, thankfully at my station and kind of the way I like to do things, we don't get real crazy. If it warrants, yeah, we'll go wall to wall, especially with tornado warnings. But severe thunderstorm warnings, usually we cut in during commercial breaks and get out of there because we don't want to frighten people unless it's truly a frightening situation.
So we'll introduce this guest. Many of you may not know who this person is, but many of you who would be on social media, Twitter or Facebook, would know that this is Eric Wilhelm. He is the chief meteorologist at WFMJ, Channel 21 in Youngstown, Ohio. He's been there for about 2.5 years, a little over 2.5 years. Previously, he'd been at AccuWeather for more than a decade, and he went to the Ohio State University.
It's important to get that "the" in there.
So the first thing I would ask is if he has dotted the I yet at Ohio Stadium.
Boy, I have not. It's only a select, special group of people who get to dot the I. Jack Nicholas, a few other big name celebrities, but I haven't risen to that level yet. I guess someday maybe.
Yeah, that means he's not important yet.
Not yet. No.
He'll get there. So when I looked at your bio, because the first, we'll get to what the main reason you were on for, which is the outbreak that occurred 30 years ago at the end of this month in May. I looked at your bio and I was highly surprised, and I'm usually not highly surprised, that you, Eric Wilhelm, were born in Xenia, Ohio, which is interesting, although it was not in 74, it was in 78. But you were born in Xenia, famous town in Ohio for bad weather, seemingly the heart of tornadoes in Ohio, because Xenia hit several times. And you were born not long after a very major event that occurred in 78, which was the blizzard. So,
that's right.
And so you said you were probably born to be a meteorologist because you were born in this town that's famous for tornadoes, born right after a blizzard that occurred. So was that your interest, more or less, that you were like moving in that direction as you were a child?
Well, when I was a child, I got interested in weather more because of the young cable network called the Weather Channel, which I was transfixed by it. And I also loved back then, the USA Today weather page was the only color weather page you could find. It was bright, it had cool charts and graphs, and I think that's what got me interested. A lot of meteorologists can point to an event, a weather event, such as May 31st, 85, as what really got them really interested in weather, but I don't really have an event. It was more the newspaper, the TV, and I just so happened to be, born in a weather hotspot in Ohio, in Xenia, right after the most famous snowstorm in Ohio, the blizzard of 78, and I was born in the most famous, in the city with the most famous tornado in Ohio. Of course, Xenia was hit with an F5 back in the super outbreak of 1974.
So, and I assume you grew up there for many of your years, I would assume. Would that be correct? Or
Actually, my family moved away from Xenia when I was about 2, so I actually don't remember living there all that much. I actually grew up more in eastern Ohio as opposed to southwestern Ohio.
So yeah, because I'd almost have asked a question about the childhood in Xenia, but you don't remember that. So anyway, but reflecting on in eastern Ohio, now you were living in eastern Ohio when 85 occurred, and we'll get back to that when we get back to that. Do you remember that day specifically, and then we'll come back to that again when get back to it?
I think I do. I have a memory of being in the basement because there was a tornado warning, and I'm pretty sure it was this day, even though there was no actual tornado in the city I lived in, which is New Philadelphia, which is about an hour and a half southwest of where most of the tornadoes were. But I'm pretty sure it was from that day. I was about that age. So I remember that being the only time when I was a kid that we took shelter in a basement because of the weather. I don't have any other weather memories like that, so I'm pretty sure that it was that day.
Okay, so then you decided to go to college, so undoubtedly you picked the Ohio State University, which has a very good meteorology program. Was that kind of where you were aiming, is that you wanted to go to Ohio State for their program at the time?
Yeah, in Ohio, to get a 4-year bachelor degree in meteorology, you pretty much have to go to Ohio State. Now, you can get a minor in meteorology at a couple of places, and you can take some meteorology classes at some universities, including right here in Youngstown at Youngstown State. But to get a 4-year bachelor's degree in Ohio, you pretty much got to go to Ohio State, and that was fine with me because I grew up a Buckeyes fan, and a lot of my friends were going to Ohio State, so it was kind of a no-brainer. I didn't even apply anywhere else.
So when you went to Ohio State, how was the program at the time? This would have been the late 90s into the early 2000s. So what was the program like? And I would assume, since you're still somewhat connected to it, being now in Youngstown, what can you see the differences between what it was when you were going through it and what you can kind of see from it, maybe from afar now?
Well, like most meteorology programs, I think the enrollment has gone up considerably in the last 20 years. I was there in the mid to late 90s. The program actually didn't even start, the 4-year bachelor's program, until the mid 80s. So it's a relatively young meteorology program compared to your Oklahomas and Penn States and that sort of thing. I graduated with, I want to say, maybe 11 or 12 other graduates when I graduated. So it was a smallish program, but it's quite a bit bigger now, and you know, I suspect that's the case in a lot of programs. The interest in meteorology has gone up a lot since about the time I was at Ohio State in the mid to late 90s.
So I would assume Twister was not in your, although you graduated from high school right the year of Twister, so
that's right. I think it was actually in the theaters when I graduated that June.
so that was, you're not what I would consider a Twister meteorology student.
Exactly. That's the next generation. People who, you know, are probably 15, 16 years younger than me, or maybe 10 years. Definitely Twister, I think, is a big seminal moment getting youngsters interested in this field, even though, of course, the movie has very little resemblance to reality.
So after you went through college, you ended up, before you went to WFMJ, you went to AccuWeather. And can you talk about what that experience was like, serving in a national market with the large handful of cities that you were able to be heard in?
A very unique experience, and one that I recommend to any graduate in meteorology who is trying to find a job. And especially if you're not sure about TV, AccuWeather is a great place to go work, either for a couple of years or for 10 or more years. I was kind of a jack of all trades, and I actually did more non-TV stuff than TV stuff. I was part of the video world over there. I appeared on CBS Evening News once or twice, and I was on Fox Business a couple of times, and I did a lot of recorded video stuff. But actually, my main role there for most of my time was radio. I would sit in a little radio booth about 4x4 and broadcast weather forecasts on stations all over the country. So I would hop around from New York to Chicago to Los Angeles to Houston, et cetera, et cetera. And that was kind of my main role. I did a lot of other things as well. I created graphics. I was kind of a graphics artist at times. I briefed. AccuWeather has a lot of television clients that they don't get video from them, but AccuWeather briefs their talent. They provide the forecast for the talent at some of these stations, and so I would brief a lot of weather talent across the country on their forecast. Make forecasts for newspapers. AccuWeather has a huge stable of newspaper clients across the country, and you produce not only the forecast, but sometimes some graphical elements that go into their page, their weather page. And so I did a lot of things, and I learned a lot of things, because at AccuWeather or the Weather Channel or WeatherBug or any national company like that, you get to learn geography and the nuances of all these different markets very, very quickly. I can tell you, some nuances about Houston, Texas, or wherever else. That's kind of experience you simply don't get just in the TV world. You learn your market really well, but I learned a lot of markets really well over the course of 10 or 11 years.
Yeah, just going off of that, I mean, you served in, like you said, New York City, Philadelphia, Boston, Chicago. Tell us what it's like experiencing the different kinds of weather that you forecasted for each market and what that was like.
It can be pretty wild, because your day, even more so at a company like that, greatly depends on how busy the weather is in the big cities, in the big markets. If it's quiet everywhere, you're going to have a pretty decent day. But if you've got a snowstorm up the East Coast, it's not like you're just on TV in New York or just on the radio in New York. You're dealing with it in New York and Providence and Boston and Philly and D.C. And so you're hopping around, and of course every different place has a different forecast, and you got to keep it all straight. All right, our forecast for New York City is 3 to 6 inches. Boston, we've got 6 to 12, and you've got to be the expert in all of those markets, sometimes back to back. I would go on in New York City on 10:10 winds AM and talk about a huge blizzard, and then flip the switch and go to Boston and have to be their expert too, talk about their geography, talk about the nuances that go into that forecast, and it was challenging at times, and a great experience, and again, I learned so much. And it wasn't just the East Coast, even though that's where a lot of AccuWeather's clients are located. Learned a lot about the West as well, which is a whole different world with the mountains and the valleys and the deserts. There are a lot of people at AccuWeather who actually forecast internationally. that was one area that I never dipped my toes into. I was never an international person, but there are people over there that have to forecast for countries all over the world. It's really something.
So when you had to do all this stuff for all these clients and radio stations and whatnot, were there any events that you had to really work at? For example, doing a lot of clients in the Northeast, you ran into a lot of blizzards, nor'easters, sometimes these East Coast runner hurricane type things. Do you remember having to do more stuff than you'd normally do when you would do your typical radio stuff for these stations?
Yeah, many times, and I always kind of joked because I was the main weekend morning personality or radio expert, I guess you could say, for 6 or 7 years, and I always joked that all these things always happen on the weekends, of course, because I was there. But particularly in 2006, there was a big snow event in New York City. I think it was in February. That was not supposed to be a big deal. I think we went out with a forecast of 3 to 6 inches, and the writing started getting on the wall pretty quickly that we needed to up our totals, so we made it 6 to 12, thinking, all right, 12 might be a little out of reach, but let's just make it 6 to 12, give it enough room. Well, what happened was a mesoscale band set up right over Manhattan and right over the 5 boroughs of New York City, and sat there for a few hours. The snowfall rates were 2-3 inches an hour. There was thunder and lightning, and before you know it, we had a forecast out of 20 to 24 inches. And so our forecast went from something like 3 to 6 to 20 to 24 inches in like 4 or 5 hours. It was just, having to adjust that quickly. It gave you whiplash, and a lot of people, were upset at first because it was kind of a busted forecast. But then there was a lot of appreciation for the fact that we did adjust quickly, and we adjusted more quickly than some of their local TV stations did. So in the end, we made the adjustments we had to, but it was a wild few hours. I didn't leave that booth, I don't think, for 8 or 9 hours that day. Don't ask me where I went to the bathroom.
Yeah, well, I won't. Well, that's TMI there. Yeah. But anyway, so you were there for about 10 years, 11 years, somewhere like that. So there was it was pretty much all over the place. Yeah.
Yep.
But so besides snowstorms, did you have to cover severe weather? And was that really something you could do at AccuWeather for a local, let's say a radio station, say in Houston or something?
Yes, although I worked mostly the overnight and morning shift, and so I had less severe weather to deal with typically than some of the afternoon and evening guys, kind of like what I am now. So thankfully I didn't have a ton of it, but we did go wall-to-wall on radio stations when there was a squall line. And it's very similar to TV. If a tornado warning comes out, they're going to go wall-to-wall with you on the radio in most of these cases, especially in the big markets. A lot of small market radio stations these days, there's nobody working there, especially on the weekends. They're playing all tape stuff. But in the bigger markets, on the bigger stations, there's a live presence there 24/7. And so yeah, many times, especially later in the morning, as severe weather becomes a little more likely at that time of day, it would get rollicking. But I didn't have it as bad as some of the people who worked later in the day.
So there was a lot of people that you worked with. So talk about the people at AccuWeather that you worked with and were there, and some of them probably are still there. So talk about them for a little bit.
Well, AccuWeather has, as of a couple of years ago anyway, they employ at the State College office something like 70 to 75 full-time meteorologists. It's a lot of weather weenies under one roof, that's for sure. And then there's a satellite office out in Kansas that they bought or ate up the group Weather Data about 10 years ago, and that became AccuWeather Enterprise Solutions. And so there's kind of a satellite office in Kansas. But in the State College office, yeah, about 70 to 75, and there's a huge range of different experience levels and talent and that sort of thing. AccuWeather started full-time basically in the late 60s, early 70s, and many of those people are still there now, 40, 45 years later. Then you have fresh graduates that just graduated or are probably graduating here in the next couple of weeks, who are probably getting ready to start their careers at AccuWeather. So there's really an enormous range, and that makes for an interesting dynamic, certainly. With that many weather weenies under one roof, you've got a lot of opinions, a lot of opinionated people, and map discussions oftentimes became very interesting, very heated, especially in big ticket weather situations. Some people were known as snowmongers. They wanted to take snowfall amounts up at every opportunity. And then you had the anti-mongers who wanted to poo-poo everything. I always kind of fashioned myself as somewhere kind of in between. With that many people under one roof, it gets really interesting. And now it's so much different. I make the forecast exactly the way I want to make it. I don't have to ask anybody else or consult with anybody else. But that consensus approach that they have at AccuWeather, and I'm sure it's the same thing at the Weather Channel as well, makes for a better forecast in many cases, because you have a lot of opinions, but then it all gets funneled down into one usually pretty good forecast.
I want to know who these snowmongers are. And I think I remember this. There was an AccuWeather video of somebody going crazy about snowfall totals.
Jim Kosick, yes.
And I would take it as that would be considered a snowmonger.
Yeah.
And somebody who says it's going to flurry and it ends up dumping 10 inches of snow would be the poo-poo person.
Yeah. Well, that video you refer to is Jim Kosick, who is now the chief meteorologist at a station in Atlanta, and he became famous for that. That went super viral, and I wouldn't necessarily say Jim was a monger, but he was a great entertainer. And so when there was a big event that he was talking about, he made sure that everybody was got the information and was entertained at the same time. Of course, Joe Bastardi, who most people in the weather enterprise know. He left AccuWeather before I left, but I worked with him for many years, and he likes his snow, that's for sure. But Joe's also a very, very talented forecaster and has really succeeded a lot since he's left AccuWeather. But when he was there, of course, he was always kind of pumping for more snow to go in the forecast.
So then there's several other people that there's one, and I know Henry's gonna go nuts if I mention this certain person in Kansas. And Eric knows who it is. I won't even have to mention who it is. Mm-hmm. And I would consider that when you said there's a lot of people that have opinions or opinionated, I would assume you mean that person.
Yes, the individual we're talking about is certainly very opinionated. He does voice his opinions from afar, though, because he is out in Kansas, and his opinion is valued, certainly. There's a reason why he's as successful as he is. He's a very good meteorologist. Would some people cringe when he called, not wanting to pick up the phone? Sure, but thankfully I didn't have to deal with that all that much. But Weather Data, the Kansas company that AccuWeather bought about a decade ago, has added a lot to their repertoire over there, and we've actually, I haven't been there for 2.5 years, and I still say we like I work there. AccuWeather, at least a couple of meteorologists actually left the state college office to go work out in Wichita. So packed their belongings and went out to Kansas, and so things are thriving as far as I know.
Yeah, AccuWeather has definitely expanded quite a bit. They, like you said, they got weather data, and then they got the Brandon Sullivan site, hazardous notifications, and we use that here at the network just for our own modeling, forecasting stuff. And as much as I have my opinions about AccuWeather and this certain person that we are discussing, their tools are certainly great with the ECMWF got added, which, I mean, if I can get the ECMWF, I'll put everything aside just for that. But anyway, you spent 11 years at AccuWeather. Explain the transition between AccuWeather and now WFMJ in Ohio.
Well, it's certainly a whole different world, the local television world. After 11 years, my wife and I kind of decided that maybe we'll try something different. I didn't think anything would come of it, and actually the job I applied for here was the morning meteorologist job, which was open at the time, but the former chief meteorologist was getting set to retire in a few months, and so they actually thought I would be a better fit for that position than the morning position, and so that certainly changed the equation a little bit for me. And the transition was a little bit difficult on a couple of levels. One, simply the hours. For 11 years, I didn't sleep. I worked overnights for 5 years, and then for 6 years, I worked kind of a hybrid shift, sort of similar to what a lot of TV meteorologists work now on the morning shift. I would go in at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning and work until 10 or 11 a.m., something like that. Now I'm on completely the opposite shift, and it's amazing. After 2.5 years, I still have a hard time sleeping in. I'm still a morning person. A lot of people on this shift stay up until 2 or 3 in the morning. They have a hard time winding down after work. I go pretty much right to bed, and I'm up, 8 o'clock in the morning, which is kind of unusual for this shift. But one thing that is nice is being able to focus really intently on one area instead of hopping around. I've gotten to know my market really well. Youngstown's a smaller market as well, so we actually only have 5 counties that we're responsible for, which isn't many at all, and that makes severe weather coverage certainly a lot easier when we don't have 15 or 20 counties to deal with. So transitioning from AccuWeather to a market this small was easier than if I had hopped to a big market in some respects, because now I can learn how to do TV without getting overwhelmed by the responsibility of so many counties.
Yeah, the localization really has to be much nicer. Personally, what I'd want is more of a localized market where you can know your counties, you can know the towns. I mean, it just comes to you like that, like it's natural to you. You can know a lot of people, you can know points of interest for people. That's because with the bigger markets, you serve a lot of counties. I mean, if you're like Jay Prater over in Kansas, you cover 2/3 of the state, and he does a pretty good job. But personally, I'd want a market like yours where you can pinpoint down to a certain area of counties.
Yeah, absolutely.
But then I think it also helps too that you were from the area, so that even helped out more when that job came open, because you weren't going to go and look for a job, say, oh, I'll start rattling off towns like Topeka, Kansas, or Joplin, Missouri, or Shreveport, Louisiana. You would want to go home where you kind of know everything kind of offhand from growing up. So I would assume if you were going to go into TV after leaving AccuWeather, Youngstown was probably going to be at least your first choice.
Yeah, that's right. Youngstown, very attractive market for me individually because it is closer to home, and I know the area fairly well. It wasn't a no-brainer though, because my wife is not from here. She had a pretty good gig over at Penn State, and so for us to kind of up and move here wasn't necessarily a slam dunk decision, but things have worked out just fine, and we really like the area, and it is nice to be closer to home. I can do as I'm going to do tomorrow and go play golf with my dad, and I couldn't do that when I lived 4.5 hours away. Yeah.
So in the span of the couple of years you've been there, there's been some interesting weather that has occurred in the eastern part of Ohio and western Pennsylvania. If I remember, you started at your job, and I believe Sandy may have been like right after. I think it was not long after, and it did affect your area.
It did. I had not gone on the air yet. I had just started a couple weeks beforehand, so I was still kind of training and kind of getting my footing. So Sandy did bring a fair amount of rain to this area, some wind as well, and certainly very cold temperatures for late October. I remember it being very cold, and there was even some wet snow in the mountains of West Virginia and Pennsylvania, as I remember. But around here, it was a chilly rain for days. It seemed to last days because, as I recall, Sandy sort of just became a big upper low at some point that just sort of spun around and brought spokes of moisture around here, and it was just kind of a lousy stretch of weather at the end of October and early November back in 2012. But if I had still been at AccuWeather, Sandy would have been easily the most memorable storm I would have encountered over there because, of course, it was such a big deal in New York City and some of those major markets. So Sandy was a miss for me. I wasn't at AccuWeather, and I wasn't on the air yet here either.
So then after that, has there really been anything outside the typical somewhat lake effect snow that you could get in your northern counties and some severe weather, but not a whole lot? So it's been kind of what I would consider, quote, boring?
Somewhat, yeah. We've had a couple of rough winters in a row with very, very cold temperatures compared to average. Last year was very snowy. This year was much more typical snow-wise. We had about 80 inches, which is 12 or 13 inches above average, but last year we had closer to 100. We did have an EF0 tornado last summer in June, or maybe early July, that did rip the roof off some houses, some barn damage, relatively minor, and thankfully there were no injuries with this, but we did have an EF0 tornado in our viewing area last summer. Yeah, other than that, though, there hasn't been a lot of real big-ticket items since I've been here. Just a couple of really cold winters, a chilly summer last year, especially in July, but not a huge, memorable outbreak of severe weather just yet. We've had our severe weather days with hail and some damaging winds, but nothing that really sticks out as, wow, that's going to be a career-defining event.
So in your 2.5 years or so at WFMJ, what do you think your favorite event has been to cover for your area?
Well, as far as a favorite event, well,
or I guess most memorable event. I guess some events you can't really call favorite.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I like snow to some extent, but we've had a lot of snow, but we haven't had a huge snowstorm. We've gotten nickeled and dimed a lot around here. I think the most memorable event is probably that EF0 tornado last summer, simply because it was hard to see. It basically was on the radar for one scan. It was a little blip with a little hook. I saw it. I wish I'd made a bigger deal of it, but it was one scan and then it was gone. And then 15 minutes later we hear, oh, there might have been a tornado in Canfield or Ellsworth Township. And I remember thinking, oh man, I really should have played that up more, because I did see a little signature on the radar, but it was so fast. But thankfully, again, that in the grand scheme of things caused some damage, but not a tremendous amount, and thankfully no one was injured.
So when you talked about that the biggest event is an EF0 tornado,
Yep.
that people in Kansas and Oklahoma would be like laughing, because they would get an EF0 tornado like in a month in December or something like that.
Exactly. Keeping my fingers crossed, because of course we don't want huge damaging events around here, but so far it's been relatively benign. Even in the winters, we've had so much cold that the cold has almost overwhelmed the pattern, and it's prevented us from getting a huge snowstorm. So I think the biggest storm overall has probably been 8-9 inches, something like that. Nothing earth-shattering.
So when we talk about, because now we're going to get to what happened 30 years ago, comparatively speaking to the 2.5 years we've been in Youngstown and over a decade at AccuWeather, and growing up in eastern Ohio and in that area, 1985, on May 31st, was a very big day. And if something like that, and we'll get to that day right after this question, if we had something like that, like now, I mean not now, but in 2015, would that be considered the biggest event you've ever worked if something similar to that would happen now?
Yeah, no question. No question. It would be a seminal moment. It would be a career-defining moment, if you will, just as I'm sure the TV meteorologists who were working in this market 30 years ago, I'm sure that was their defining moment. And if they were around for the blizzard of 78, maybe that too. But certainly the May 31st, 85 was the biggest weather story in this area, in this region, really. Northern Ohio, western Pennsylvania, parts of Ontario. That outbreak certainly is at the top of many lists around here.
Now, when I went and looked at it today, and I found this interesting, this outbreak we're talking about today is the deadliest tornado outbreak between the super outbreak in '74 and the 2011 outbreak.
Yeah.
And I find that interesting because, given the fact that it's kind of not quite smack in the middle, it's 11 years after the super outbreak, it's 26 years before 2011, and this outbreak killed, I think, 90 people, many of them in Pennsylvania, some in Ohio, but it had tornadoes, large tornadoes, violent tornadoes, in places you don't expect violent tornadoes. Eastern Ohio and Pennsylvania is not Tornado Alley.
No, it really
You do not
isn't.
expect that.
And this still the one specific tornado, the F5 that rolled through the county just north of Youngstown, Trumbull County, and went into Pennsylvania. It remains the only F5 tornado in Pennsylvania history. So there's only been one, and it was on this day back on May 31st of '85. So very unique situation, that's for sure.
So talk about the day, because you've done some, you're getting some stories together for a couple pieces you're doing later in the month. So, and there's some satellite images and whatnot from the GOES 6 satellite, because I saw that. That tells you how far back we're going on the GOES satellites. We're at 13 and 14 and 15, and we're back to 6 on this.
Yeah.
So talk about how the setup was for that day, because you've done some little research on it.
Yeah, it was a setup that was pretty unique, especially in late May. This setup might be a little more typical around here in the heart of summer. It was extremely humid. Dew points were in the 70s, and there was a very, very strong shortwave disturbance going through the Midwest and up into the Great Lakes. It hit at the right time of day. This outbreak started mid-afternoon, 3, 4 o'clock. What happens a lot of times around here is you get an outbreak late in the afternoon out in the Midwest, in Illinois and Iowa and Indiana. By the time it gets here, it rolls through in the middle of the night. And sure, there could be severe weather with that, but of course in the middle of the night, usually your dynamics are not going to be as good as during the middle of the day. So this hit right at the right time of the day, the most unstable part of the day. This region was near what's known as the triple point, pretty close to the intersection of a cold front, warm front, occluded front. So there was tremendous amounts of wind shear in the atmosphere, and again, pretty unusual for this area. This is much more of a typical setup in the plain states. So you had a southerly wind at the ground, but then you didn't have to go up very far at all before all of a sudden the wind was more out of the west to northwest. So you had a tremendously high shear environment. The Cape, the instability was through the roof. And so everything just came together just right. Thankfully, this doesn't happen often around here, but everything just happened to come together just right that day. For not only tornadoes, but long-track tornadoes. Some of these were on the ground forever. They went and went and went. It was, in some ways, maybe similar, in some respects, to April 11th or April 27th, 2011, down in the south. Those tornadoes were on the ground forever, and this day was kind of similar.
So I've looked at them, and most of the tornadoes went due east, which is interesting because when we look back, and this is back a couple of episodes when we did the Palm Sunday 65 outbreak. At the beginning of that outbreak, those tornadoes were moving northeast, and then they turned easterly, which was interesting. And I don't know if this is like some kind of oddity, but it seems like tornadoes in the eastern Midwest, Ohio and into Pennsylvania, they tend to go west to east. Now, that's just me with an opinion, but that seems to be a bit odd. And I noticed another thing when I looked at some videos, because surprisingly enough, I'm surprised and this was the first time I'd ever heard about this outbreak, when I would see tornado videos, these VHS tapes of tornadoes, and they would start saying this tornado was on this day in this place. And the first thing and one of them I think was the F5, which I think was Wheatland, Pennsylvania. Yes. I think that was the F5 one. Was Niles and Wheatland.
Right. Yep.
And I was like, the person who was taking a video camera of it immediately knew what it was, which I found interesting because I'm thinking nobody in Pennsylvania probably knows what a tornado looks like. But he knew what it was, and all you see is it going past this guy's house. I assume you know which video I'm talking about.
I've seen it, yeah.
And all you see is this big, huge tornado just ripping everything apart, and they're just staring at it. It's like, oh, look at that.
Yeah.
Kind of made me think, okay, and if I remember, I think that's the only video of any of the tornadoes that I know.
There's not much out there. I've seen the video you're talking about, and we have some internal news videos here at the station, but I don't think they captured it live. So yeah, it's a whole different world. Of course, 30 years later, everybody's got a camera in their pocket, but back then, of course, it wasn't nearly as common. But yeah, it's a little surprising there was only one. And you mentioned the west to east. I don't have a good explanation for that. You're right. The map of this outbreak, a lot of these tornadoes did pretty much track west to east. The other thing that's interesting about this is once you're into Pennsylvania, heading east of here into Pennsylvania, the terrain gets very, very hilly. I've made that drive 6 million times across I-80 from Youngstown to over towards State College and Williamsport, PA, and some of those ridges get up to 2,000 feet over there, and a lot of these tornadoes continued right into that terrain and stayed pretty strong. This remains the strongest. There's a tornado in Center County, which is where State College, Pennsylvania is, and it was an EF4, back then an F4. And it's extremely rugged north of State College over there, and that tornado not only survived, but was an F4. So another real unusual thing about this outbreak is that this produced a lot of tornadoes in areas that the terrain usually saves them somewhat from getting the worst tornadoes.
Can you talk about the radar data from that event? Obviously, that was back in the era where I believe the WSR 74s, am I correct?
There's 57s and 74s.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they were just about in the development of the 88Ds at that time. But talk about that kind of radar data from the event.
Well, if you bear with me for just 1 second, I'm going to go over here and grab something to show you here. I'll be right back.
Oh, he's going to show stuff. Oh, good. We got stuff. See?
Ooh, we have a fancy desk.
Ooh, we have fancy pictures.
I did an interview at the National Weather Service office in Cleveland a couple of days ago about this outbreak, and the meteorologist in charge at that office showed me this radar image. This is one of the tornadoes, not the Niles-Wheatland tornado, but one of the tornadoes that day, and this is the actual radar image. This is what it looked like, black and white, 1950s technology, still alive and kicking in 1985, and as you mentioned, this was kind of right at the end of that era before things started to modernize a little bit. So this is what they were dealing with, and they would get some of this and then have to handwrite various things on maps, and it seemed like such an archaic way of doing things. And to me, you know, the 80s was a long time ago, but it doesn't seem like it was the Stone Ages. But in terms of weather technology, in some respects, it really was. They were using this information and data the best they could, and warning people as best they could, but they were certainly limited by the technology. And now, of course, we have radar images that look more like this, you know, fully colored, and you can do 3D, you know, slices of storms, and we can take a look at, you know, hail and all sorts of great stuff. But back then, they just didn't have that. But in the major outbreaks still, and this was even the case in 74, in the major outbreaks, even with that archaic technology, you could still pick out the important features. You could still see the hook echoes and stuff in the strongest tornadoes. Now, the technology then could not pick out certainly the EF0 spin-ups and little EF1 tornadoes that we can see more easily now. But back then, you had an F4 and F5, the radar usually still gave it away pretty easily with the, you know, easy to pick out hooks.
Now, if I remember, I think it was the case back then that the radars were still far apart. There from in Youngstown itself, or in that area, you had the weather office in Cleveland that I think had a radar. State College had one, and I think Pittsburgh had one. So you were kind of in the area of Youngstown's in no man's land.
And it still is in some respects. One of the challenges in this market is that we're about halfway between Cleveland and Pittsburgh. When the radar beam goes over my DMA, it's 4,000 to 5,000 feet high. So we have a hard time seeing much below that sometimes. And that's why a lot of times around here, if it's drizzling or there's flurries or something, the radar's quiet because it's all falling beneath the beam. And that was one of actually the challenges with the EF0 tornado we had last June, was that with those weaker spin-ups around here, you know, there better be some rotation up at 4,000 or 5,000 or 6,000 feet and higher, or you might miss it. And so that's still the case. We're still in a little bit of a radar hole here, halfway between Cleveland and Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a similar situation I know here, and northeast Missouri, I believe, is where, at least in my area, we have radars in Sioux Falls, La Crosse, Twin Cities, and Des Moines. And I'm up here in Clear Lake, Iowa, next to Mason City, and that is literally right in the center of all 4 radar areas. So, I mean, if there's a low-level rotation, we're not going to see it. I mean, we'd have to look. Anything that we get is going to be 4,000, 5,000 feet up in the air. So,
or higher.
Yeah, or higher. And same thing down in northeast Missouri, and I'm guessing probably, especially in the west in some areas, it's really bad. But yeah, so
I know there's a huge hole in Kansas, which is a place you don't want to radar hole. Now, of course, the hole is in a pretty sparsely populated area, but that doesn't mean nobody lives there. And in the heart of Tornado Alley, boy, seeing those radar holes is ominous.
So what this event was, so you said you had the WSR-57s, am I correct?
Yep.
Did you go to the 74 when you think you got upgraded to the 74s or the 88Ds? How many years after do you think?
I think it was in the late 80s, so maybe 88, 89, something like that. That's my guess. I don't know that for certain, but it was probably a couple or a few years later.
So when you have that image, that black and white of that system, and there it is, would they at Cleveland, could they actually, or if somebody tried this, been able to colorize that to find out what it would look like, so you could take that image to colorize it into the other image? Is that possible? Could that be done?
That's a good question, and I don't know the answer to that one. Yeah, I'm sure seasoned veterans at the National Weather Service probably know the answer to that, but I don't know the answer to that one. If they could, it probably would take a lot of time back then.
Because, and I find this interesting for the fact that when we did our thing on the Palm Sunday 65, I showed radar images. They looked exactly like that, maybe a little bit even worse.
Yeah.
And then when we're going to do our Twin Cities outbreak next week, more radar images that look exactly like that again. Of course, both outbreaks, Twin Cities and Palm Sunday, were in 65. This is 85. They still look the same, although it's noted that on that image, and you could put it back up again, that you see a big bright area, which is interesting. That dark area, I would assume that's the dark area, or it's kind of really highlighted because it looks very interesting.
Yeah, right about here, there's a hook, and so that's your tornado right there, and then this is the anvil coming out of the storm. This specific image is from Central, I believe. This is one of the tornadoes that ripped through the mountains of Central PA and still looked this bad. So this is a very, very ominous looking radar image in 1985.
And I could even tell from that, and you could look at it, how it's being sheared off to the east.
Yeah.
Because right from the tornado, you could be a couple miles to the north and there's nothing there.
Yeah.
And you could be a couple miles to the south. So it was very elongated. Did that kind of surprise you when you looked at that image, that it looked fairly sheared off? It just looks very displaced.
Yeah,
it does not look like the other one.
A little bit, and I do think there was a ton of wind in the mid-levels of the atmosphere that day, which did help with the shear environment, but also, and probably because the steering flow at the mid-levels was likely very much west to east. That's probably why a lot of these did take that course. But yeah, that kind of wind at that kind of speeds in the mid-levels certainly will shear some storms apart sometimes.
Now, was there weather radio in the area at the time, in Youngstown, or in the areas where these tornadoes were in your viewing area that you were in now?
Yeah, weather radio was around then, certainly not used as much as it is now. The National Weather Service person I spoke with a couple of days ago, the meteorologist in charge up there, did not have a number for me as to the lead time of the warning for the F5 tornado. But in 1985, the average lead time for a tornado warning nationally was about 13 minutes. Right now, it's 7 or 8 minutes on average. So in 30 years, we've pretty much cut it in half. Or I had that backwards. No, I got that right. Yeah. Anyway, it's improved. It's been a long week. People can. I had it backwards. Yeah, the average lead time then was 7 or 8 minutes. Now it's up to 13. You get more time now. So people did not have a lot of warning typically in 1985 with tornadoes. I would think in the stronger tornadoes, such as on this outbreak, they might have a little better lead time. I wish I knew exactly how much lead time the tornadoes that unfortunately killed a lot of people that day, I wish I knew how much lead time those specific ones had. It'd be interesting to know.
And then there's dead quiet.
Did we lose him? All right, you're back.
We're all still here. But have you gone back at your station to find anything? Did your station keep anything from 1985 from the event?
Yeah, we have some tape, and I haven't actually gotten a chance to look at it just yet. I plan on doing that probably on Monday.
Ooh!
We have some tape of not only the newscasts, but some raw footage of damage and that sort of thing. Two of our other meteorologists on staff here will be, as part of our big remembrance piece on this, they're going to be talking to survivors, talking to people who have specific memories of that day. This weather event is certainly #1 on people's lists around here. Everybody who's lived here since 1985 has a story from that day. It seems like even if you lived a half an hour away to the south, you've got some sort of story, it seems like, about May 31st, 1985. So it'll be real interesting to see who they talk to and what kind of memories are unearthed. And I look forward to learning myself, because even though I'm from Eastern Ohio, I'm not from this specific area, and so I was a child back then, so I'm still learning about this outbreak in many respects, and so I think that process will definitely continue here over the next few weeks.
So I have the very small image of the satellite. It's this tiny. So sorry, people who are watching this.
Do Control+, Jeff, and see if that can zoom it in.
Yeah, I did. It did this. That's what it did. So this is what I got. So, but let me see what I can do. So just a second. But yeah, there it is. So you can see, almost looks like right there.
Very young.
That looks like a low-level jet going right into the storms. That looks interesting.
Yeah,
see, the storms in Ontario formed first, and then the storms down here went down further. So that was interesting.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what the gentleman at the Weather Service in Cleveland pointed out to me the other day as well. Was Ontario was the first, and then everything sort of started happening very quickly off to the south and west. And also in that satellite image, really, it's a pretty impressive satellite image for being 30 years old. You can pick out the overshooting tops on those storms as the sun goes down. So that's pretty neat. It's a fascinating looking image, especially, again, since you don't usually see that sort of thing around Eastern Ohio and Western PA.
Yeah, because this is pretty fascinating 80s technology for satellites. This is pretty good for 30 years old.
Yeah, it really is.
I was slightly surprised when I saw this. This is pretty decent stuff.
It's not all that dissimilar from something you'd look at today, really. It holds up well.
It's just not colorized.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's visible because I can see the sun setting on it. So this would be similar to what you would see on the current GOES satellite on visible.
Yeah, it really is.
So and it's interesting that and it's noted that these clouds are streaming just like that radar image. They're going east to southeast. So that and you can see even in the upper levels. I could look back here. This is me being geeky. This low level, these cirrus clouds that are going way faster right back here in Western Ohio, they're just zipping. So this thing was there was something that's just really pushing these storms. So, but if you see any, would you say that if you see something like this, let's say in a model run, maybe like 5 days out, and it's centered in your area, will you get people, or will you start to get a little bit intense about it, and then we'll get a little further into that?
Yeah, probably. If I saw something as obvious and kind of a no-brainer situation like this, yeah, the first thing I would do I would start talking about it a little on social media first, and maybe my Weather for Weather Geeks video that I do every day, and then as we get a little closer, then the general audience, the less maybe scientifically inclined audience, I'd start talking about it there. But I usually start talking first, especially about stuff in the longer range. I keep that speculation for the online audience for the most part before I hit the TV audience with it, the much more general populace, if you will.
Yeah, and again, I'm just reading off the page. I know I was not alive during this event, as you can clearly see, but
Well, Henry, I was only 4, so and our guest was only 7, so
Yeah.
it's like we're all we were hikes back then, and you weren't alive yet. So,
but clearly this had the I mean, it had all of the specifications of a severe weather event. The low deepening to 980 millibars, wind speeds at 850 millibars, increasing to 50 knots. Or I'm reading the wrong event. My bad. But
I bet it's similar though.
yeah, but it's similar. I was on the wrong tab. I was reading the super outbreak. But
oh well, if we can compare, we have satellite images from that too. I mean, these outbreaks are all somewhat similar in some cases, except that the airflow, for example, on April 27th, the storms were all blowing to the northeast, whereas this one, they were kind of blowing east and then southeast. So there's some similarities. The death toll, unfortunately, was 90, and we can go into that a little bit. And then, for example, if something like this, and we kind of mentioned this, what would you do, Eric, at your station if there was something like this happening in your area, like right now? I'm not talking like now, and this current time.
In real time?
Be like wall to wall. Do you have cameras? Are you going to send people out? Are there going to be people seeing it? Storm chasers. I'm talking where you'll go all balls out like they do in the planes.
Yeah.
You're going to have chasers, and you're going to have video, and there's going to be tornadoes on your screen, and you're going to be going nuts.
We would do a kind of probably a smaller market version of that. Yeah, we don't have a helicopter here like they do in many markets such as Oklahoma City. But we would certainly be on the air continuously until who knows when, and we would have spotters out there. I've actually been pleasantly surprised for a smaller market just how many trained spotters there are that live here, and a lot of people really into the weather here. I've got a pretty loyal following of weather geeks for this market, and I would kind of rely on them a lot for an outbreak of this magnitude. We have GoPro cameras now in the station that we could easily deploy somehow, put it on a station car, make sure everybody's staying safe, but try to cover it from as many angles as we could. And we would have all our weather staff in here. Someone would be at the wall at the chroma key. Someone would be back here in the weather center, probably monitoring social media, pictures coming in, updating graphics. We would probably have a third person out in the field somewhere. In this size of a market, you're not going to have the kind of resources that your Oklahoma Cities and Dallases and places like that have. But we would certainly treat it as seriously as warranted. And people know by now with me that if I'm being really serious about something, you need to take it seriously, because usually I'm not a hypester at all. I will downplay stuff more than hype it up. So if I'm hyping something up, people around here know, I think at this point, that it's probably a pretty serious deal.
I mean, come on, Eric. I thought you would have your own Doppler radar. You had paid storm chasers. You had your own TIV, a helicopter. I thought you had the entire combo.
Well, I'd almost think, Henry, that this is probably going to be what smaller markets like Eric is, because Eric, your station is locally owned.
Yes.
So, and that's a plus.
It really is.
Owned, and isn't it owned by the newspaper?
It is. The Vindicator, the same family that owns the Vindicator newspaper here owns the station. We're one of the last of a dying breed across the country. There's not many of these types of stations left that are locally owned.
There's one in my market.
Is there? Good.
Owned by the newspaper. So.
Very nice. There's not many, and there are certainly some advantages to that, to not being owned by a Gannett or a Bellow or a Lynn or any of these big entities. There are advantages to being under that umbrella, certainly, but in my view, I think the advantages of being locally owned outweigh the disadvantages.
So, and Henry, we'll get to the shout outs and do whatever you want to do, because I wanted to get on this, because yes, Youngstown's a smaller market. Now, compared to my market, which has this station similar to yours, owned by the newspaper, of course, my market eastern Iowa, has 4 cities in it, 4 different areas. The station that I'm talking about, KCRG, is owned by the Gazette in Cedar Rapids, which is the largest city in the market. But they don't cover, the station covers the whole market, but the newspaper does not. So that's how they were able to get away with it from the FCC, because there's 3 other cities that have 3 other newspapers.
Oh, interesting.
So that's how they were able to do it. My market at the time went all crazy about weather, and they still are. They have 5 weather people now, and my market size is 90.
Yeah.
Which is, and they're doing this hybrid of mornings, and then the midday person, and then the evening person, and then the weekend people. Weekend morning, weekend evening. For many years, this station here, Channel 9, had its own helicopter. They would send it up, and they would go chasing for tornadoes. They did find some. They were shown on air. First time I ever remembered that was May 1998, which was the Washington Lone Tree tornado, which was an F3. And they showed it live on television, and I was like, oh yes, this is me getting geeky. It was the first time that I could see a tornado live from a helicopter, and I was not in Oklahoma City to see it.
That's
because
impressive.
I was seeing it in my own home, watching it on TV, and I didn't have live stream because back then you had dial-up and you couldn't get live streams worth anything. So, but now they don't have their helicopter. They got rid of that. Everything's back to normal. They do send storm chasers out. They send weather people out. So it's calmed down, because that was kind of in the 90s when everybody wanted to have a helicopter, and now everybody doesn't want to. I'm thinking that we're maybe starting to head into the drone era.
Yeah.
Where you can just send a drone up. It has a camera and it can point at a tornado instead of a helicopter, because it costs a lot less to run. But there's still the thing with the FAA and whatnot and the FCC, so we'll see. But I think that is the direction we're going, especially in smaller markets like yours and across the country, sending these little miniature helicopters and miniature planes with cameras and point them at the tornado and have them controlled from somewhere else a distance away, but not too far away. You know what I mean.
Yeah, I agree. If especially if the FAA and FCC hurdles can be overcome, drones are going to become more and more common, especially maybe in the smaller markets, because the broadcast quality can be great, and you're not putting a human at risk, and they're not that expensive in the grand scheme of things. So I agree. That's the future if the FCC and FAA allows it.
And before, Henry, we go to the thing, I want to ask Eric one question, and this will be the last one before we go to our shout-outs. Where do you see the broadcasting field in meteorology in the next 5, 10, 15 years? Do you see yourself making it to retirement age doing what you do now?
A version of what I do now, yes. Exactly what I do now, no way. And you know, I've tried my best to continue staying with the times, or even a little ahead of the times, especially for a smaller market, with my social media presence, with my web videos and that sort of thing, because that sort of thing is going to be a requirement whether people like it or not. People are not waiting for the 6 o'clock news for their forecast anymore, and people don't like being teased on Facebook or Twitter, well, click here and here's the forecast. You can't do that anymore, and that's only going to continue to be more and more the case as we go into the future. I think there will always be a place for local news and local weather, especially. There's always a place for that, but will my job look like it does now in 20 years? No, it'll be a lot different. I'm not sure exactly how, but it will certainly be a lot different, and for people like me to survive it, you've got to adapt. You can't get stuck in your ways anymore. People who are getting stuck in their ways are getting run over by the train.
And before we move on here, I just wanted to, I've successfully gone through most of this without ranting about something, so I mean, this is pretty good for me, because something usually irks me, but I'm just going to open this one up for discussion before we move on to shout-outs. I'm sure, Eric, you've probably heard over the wire or through the grapevine or however you get your news that the National Weather Service in Birmingham has spent a a relatively large amount of money on a
$7,300, I think it was.
on a quote-unquote TV studio, which I'm going to share my thoughts on this. Everyone has their opinions on it, but I do like the fact that the NWS is trying to go further in connecting with the public, because I think they're trying to not be so legacy per se, because they're doing all this new stuff, becoming a weather-ready nation. Because they used to, in the past, they've usually left a lot of that to TV media, radio, commercial media, whatever you want to call it. And now they seem to be kind of taking their own approach to things and connecting to the public on their own and not leaving that to the media. And with this, I do want to stress that this isn't the first time that a National Weather Service office, or whatever you want to call it, within the NOAA organization has done this, because the National Hurricane Center, if you've seen them, they've done briefings for it. And I'm not sure how they're going to use it. They haven't really said anything about it. I mean, if it's for briefings and updates, I'm all for it. And in the end, this is all for, because we all know that TV stations, excuse me, Eric, is a dying breed per se, and a lot of things are becoming internet-based. And if this is an internet-based thing, I think it's a great idea, because if I mean, look at, say, in Oklahoma, you're in a shelter, and I mean, most people don't have TVs in their shelters, and you have your phone though. I mean, usually you can get on your phone, and whether it is local media, if they have their streams online, I know some organizations or big guy companies don't like that, but I mean, if they can go to the National Weather Service website and they have the link right then and there and get the latest updates, I like that, because I mean, it's quick right then and there, and it's from the official source. And it doesn't matter whether it's local media. I just think it's another great outlet for getting the warning information out. And I'd really like to see them go off. This is something for the future, and it's so like 22nd century. But I mean, the text-based things, because they issue these warnings, and it is so text-based. And I mean, they're adding all this experimental impact-based warnings. And my opinion, and everybody knows this, in my area, they don't read the warning text. They don't read those fine bits of details that, I mean, usually they've left the local media to kind of alert the audience to what they're saying, or at least try to paraphrase that. And I'd like to see them kind of come off of that and go to a more simpler fashion, because they're still doing trying to get off it, like I said, the all uppercase, the National Weather Service has issued a severe blah, 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 and it goes like a paragraph long. And I mean, if you go to tornado warnings...
Well, I think, Henry, when it's something serious, it should be in all caps. But when it's like everything, it dilutes the product.
Yeah.
But anyway, getting back to what I was originally saying, I think the video and graphics is a much better way to, because I think the public gets that information better, because they're not going to read a warning statement that is that long. The graphics, if you can make it quick and straight to the point, but still enough information to get what you're trying to say, you don't want to downplay it or anything, or not put enough in, just stress your main points. I like that. And the TV studio thing, like I said, I don't know the details of that. I like it. I mean, Birmingham, that's right in Dixie Alley, so they have a lot of tornadoes there. And if they think that the public could use another source to get alerted, I think that's great, because it's just another avenue to go and receive the latest information. Because I mean, if they think they're getting misinformed or whatever they think, I mean, really, they can just go to that outlet and they can get their briefing right then and there. And James Spann, right in that forecast area, has publicly came out and said it's a great idea. But of course, we get all these Weather Enterprise people actually Weather Enterprise, that don't really appreciate. And I see both sides of the issue. One side seems to think they need to focus on warnings and doing their old-fashioned thing with, which I agree, focusing on warnings, but using new methods to get information out, I personally agree with that. And I ranted about this on my own personal page. Some meteorologists, and I'm not going to name them, seem to make it seem like a competition thing, and Eric can probably help us understand this a bit better. But I don't understand why meteorologists keep playing it on that the National Weather Service is a quote-unquote competitor. I've never agreed with that. They are a federal government organization. I mean, they're doing their job. If they think that is a good route to go, they can do it. Because, like I said, TV media, I don't think will be around. I mean, it'll be around for a lot longer, but eventually it won't be as popular as it is today. I mean, we hear it all over the news of these TV stations that are off the air because of contractual negotiations. One side doesn't like this, and it's off the air. I mean, we saw that with the Weather Channel.
Well, I'll mention this too, Henry, and this is probably going to really be a big thing too, is with the auction that's coming up with the FCC, that a lot of TV stations may just hand in their licenses and say, we don't need to be over the air anymore. We can just be on cable or satellite. I can see that coming. That I think a lot of stations are going to do it. We're going to lose probably several hundred TV stations with this auction that's supposedly coming up. And I mean, before Henry, you continue, it's over the air. People still get it over the air. I'm sure they still do in Eric's area from either his station or his other competitors. But that's getting to the point that over the air is not the thing. Most stations now live stream, and now I'm going to get into my opinion about it, about the Weather Service in Birmingham. This is probably going to force stations that don't live stream to live stream at least severe weather coverage, because if they don't, they're going to lose the audience, and then they will never get them back, and then their station will die. This is, I think, is the best thing. It is forcing TV stations that don't do it to have to do it, or they're going to be behind. That's my opinion. And I think not only the Weather Service, if NHC does it, and I got into a real Twitter tussle earlier this week, NHC does it, Hurricane Center, I want the Storm Prediction Center to do it too. Especially on these days, like if we're going to have something like a May 31st, 1985, or if we're going to have a super outbreak in 2011, or like a May 3rd, 99, something like that. I want to see something that you've never seen before. Somebody like Greg Carbon getting on in front of a TV monitor, a big TV monitor like they have in NHC, and saying, this is the risk area, there's going to be this and this and this and this happening, you need to prepare now, do this, so and so and so. Because that is something you have never seen before, because I got into a thing where they said that watching her, and this is from somebody that is in Alabama who mentioned this to me, he said, hurricanes are made for TV events. That's what he said, I quote, on my Twitter account. And the first thing I thought of about that was, after that, then why is the Weather Channel showing a bunch of tornado shows on their air? I don't see 50,000 hours of hurricane shows on. I see 50,000 hours of tornado stuff. I saw the Discovery Channel with Storm Chasers, and there's Twister, and everybody's going crazy. And every time Twister's on, there's like a whole Twitter bugaboo about Twister being on, and everybody can do it word for word. Our co-host Mike Cox, who's down in Tennessee, who's not with us because he's been busy the last couple of weeks, he can do that movie word for word, almost to the point. And I'll mention this is a slight shout out. My sister is an extra in that movie, in Twister. But anyway.
An extra? Wow.
Yeah, she was, this is going off base, she was in the drive-in movie scene, because that was filmed in Iowa.
I didn't know that. Very cool.
Here for like 2 seconds, and that's it. But Henry, you can continue ranting unless I've just completely blown your...
Anyway, just to finish that up,
and then we'll let Eric discuss what...
just a side note. I don't understand why AccuWeather's making a TV channel. I mean, that doesn't
has
the way to go online. People aren't. I mean, get into these contractual negotiations. Everybody's dropping their cable. I mean, that to me, it doesn't seem like a good business approach. But I guess for the ads, whatever floats your boat. But anyway, beyond that, and I'm not going to point any specific national organization, Weather Channel, that likes to, and it's not just me that has said this, I've heard James Spann say it all the time too, hyping forecasts. And I know, Eric, you don't do it, but there are, especially the Weather Channel, and it is so hard for me to not want to scream during some events where they say, and it's getting worse and worse all the time with all these new small weather organizations, all these people looking for likes, attention, whatever you want to call it, and they're hyping events, and it gets aggravating because, I mean, I'm not trying to downplay, because if a tornado hits your house, it's a big deal, but if you look on the broad scale, you get these slight and enhanced risks, and they're pretty, I mean, I'm not trying to make it downplay it, but they're pretty common. I mean, we see them a lot. And people hype them up to the point where it's just like, we're going to lose confidence if we keep hyping it like this, and it's not going to happen. Because they're saying, big tornado outbreak. I mean, every time there's more than 2 tornadoes, the Weather Channel says tornado outbreak on the, because they have that little thing that says either severe central or tornado outbreak, and I'm just like, what are we doing? This isn't, if we're trying to get the lead time better, we're trying to communicate confidence better. I know that's one thing they've really preached at the Weather Service, because we don't really, I mean, we say in our text forecasts that the confidence in this, we try to mention it, but I don't think it is very well communicated across the weather world. And that because we could say the chance for this event to happen, the predictability is a bit shaky, but if it does happen, it could be bad, because we get conditional risks like that all the time, but it's hard to communicate that. And just off to the last point, I'll let Eric get to his view, because I know he's probably pondering all of this. But just back to the main topic, I think if the Weather Service is trying to modernize even more, and I think the video thing is, I don't like seeing them as a competitor, because I just don't, because the local media, they compete, yeah, whatever you want to do. But I don't think weather, if we're trying to save lives and property, we shouldn't be arguing between the weather enterprise, the local media, the national media, and everyone else involved. If we're trying to save lives, we should not be arguing over the fact of competition and what each sector is doing. Because if the Weather Service is trying to improve, they can do it. Don't improve yourself. I mean, that's all there is to do it. Eric, I'll let you have your rambling about it.
Well, you know, the National Weather Service putting in TV studios in some offices, not really. I don't view it as a threat, really. You know, I could see where in some real small markets, perhaps, like real small markets, there may be a temptation if you've got a meteorologist on the air who is just sort of going through the motions and doesn't really put much effort into their job. I could see there being a temptation to say, hey, let's have the Weather Service guy on this evening and see what he says. But I'm confident in my presentation and abilities and my audience and my position, and don't really view it as any sort of a threat. I agree generally with what you said, Henry, that if the Weather Service wants to improve their communication abilities, you know, Godspeed. It can't hurt the weather enterprise. It can't hurt the general public if they hear another method of getting warnings. You know, but of course, a lot of companies are companies. They're out there to make money, and one of the ways they make money is by competition and by slamming the other guy occasionally and that sort of thing. And unfortunately, that happens. That happens not only in the weather enterprise, but in business in general, and it happens, and it's always going to happen as long as there's money to be made and there's competition to be had. Unfortunately, you're going to see that sort of sniping every now and then.
But anyway, I'll lead us away from that topic. So I've had my one rant for the night, but I thought about some things earlier, and I'm like, okay, I can't remember a lot tonight, but then I remembered that, and I think I'm just gonna call it there before I get a herd of Twitter fanatics after me for whatever I say. But anyway, let's go to shoutouts now. I'll give you some time to. Just as a reminder, a shoutout is anything. It can be a website, a book, an item, whatever you want it to be. It can be a dog if you want it. But my shout out is what's hopefully going to become operational once it cuts through the red tape of the wonderful National Weather Service is the enhanced data display. Disclaimer, experimental still after years, but I think this is really good. It needs to be cleaned up a little bit because the functionality is a bit confusing to the naked eye because it takes a while to get used to it, but the capabilities and features of this program is really good because there's a lot stuffed into this program. Again, it needs to clean up the UI a little bit, but you can do route forecasts. I mean, it's a really good, it's kind of, for those weather weenies that have used GR Earth, this is something that's really similar, and the capabilities are even more than what GR Earth offers because you can get radar, satellite, warnings, rivers, drop, or whatever you want, warnings. The model spread feature is really good. You can see the weather outlooks from a glance, or convective outlooks. It's been a long week, like Eric said. You can see observations, surface analysis, and all that good stuff. So all of that, and that was made by the National Weather Service in Charleston, and they do a great job with that. They keep moving new features into it, and it's really good. I mean, especially for emergency managers, it is probably one of the best tools. And I've heard from a few, they really like using this tool just because it's a at a glance multiple thing where it's all in one window. But beyond that, I'll throw it over to Jeff for his shout out for the night.
Okay. And since last week I was completely utterly crazy about not knowing what to do for a shout out. Oops, there it goes. I am going to shout out this tornado. This would be the Niles-Wheatland tornado. This is the actual video that I talked about, which I'm going to play it, but I'll turn the sound down. You can see there's the tornado right there. Doesn't look like a tornado you see in the plains because look, there's trees. and that's another thing. It's not like in eastern Ohio and western Pennsylvania. You can see it like you're in the middle of Kansas, and there's the debris. I mean, this is an oddity in Ohio and Pennsylvania. You don't see something like this there.
And of course, when we do have tornadic activity in this region, a lot of times it's more rain-wrapped than out in the plain states. So yeah, another reason why they're a little harder to see sometimes.
Yeah, and as you can see, just look, it's just from what I can remember, I don't know if it was from this tornado, and there it is. There's the guy there there goes. And the weird thing about it is all the wind. If you noticed in that at the end, look at all the wind, all the trees behind it with the RFD. Look at that. That's pretty good for and there's a bunch of other tornadoes. Might add that this is also another video of same tornado, which I'll also shout out. I'll shout out this one. This, I think, has a lot of stuff. Ooh, look, there's Connie Chung. We don't want to talk to her. It's like this one. Go away, Connie Chung. There's the damage. Right there. And there, right here, would be the same video again, I believe. There it is. There's the tornado again. So I'll shout that out. And we just gave Connie Chung probably the only time Connie Chung will be seen on this show. Oh boy, we're going to be in trouble now. So that's my shout out for that, the tornado, the big tornado from Niles and Wheatland. That was from Niles, Ohio and Wheatland, Pennsylvania, for those that may not know. So That's my shout out. Those 2 videos that are on YouTube.
Well, let's see if I can do this right. If I hit screen share, then I guess you can see my screen, hopefully. Let's see. Does that work?
There we go. Ooh,
Yeah.
GR.
You mentioned GR Earth, and I've used this for a few years, and you know, I just love all the Gibson Ridge products. But their latest beta version that they have out is just amazing with some of the
Oh my gosh, I love it.
stuff. I really like the new configurations tool. So you can just set up certain configurations and they're one click away. So if I want to look at the temperatures, you know, boom, there they are. If I want to switch to 500 millibar chart, there it is. All just one click away. Also viewpoints, so now you have saved camera views. So I have Ohio, Pennsylvania right here. If I want to look at my DMA, there it is. So really, really nice update. They've really cleaned up a lot of the user interface here. So love me some Gibson Ridge products, and especially GR Earth. It was actually interesting. Earlier this evening, there was a big fire at a recycling plant in Columbus, Ohio.
Yeah.
Oops. And you could actually see the smoke plume on the radar here. It was a few hours ago, so I'm losing it. But if you look at the beginning of this loop, that's not rain, but that's the smoke plume coming south of Columbus with that huge warehouse fire. I posted that on social media. The smoke was actually up to about 10,000 feet. I did a 3D view of this in GR Analyst, and so that was a pretty cool deal. So how do I unshare my screen then? Did I? If I hit
press the green button again.
All right. Did that work? All right.
See, we're teaching poor Eric how to use this stuff so he can be on other shows.
There you go.
So yeah, we aim to teach. I think we've had like so many Google Hangout versions in our show. Would you say that, Henry? Google Hangout versions?
I'm a teenager doing this, and I have a hard time keeping up with all these configurations.
Because now we have Periscope and all this other stuff now, so we're gonna really have fun. But yeah, if there's anything else, and I'm gonna get on Eric now for a little bit because we're still on air. That Eric did not mention on his weather geeky stuff. He mentioned our show. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
He did not mention a certain possible subtropical thing that could be going up the East Coast, which is interesting. And that's probably going to be the main weather topic, along with this big unsettled weather pattern that's going to be pretty much from the Rockies east all next week. Going to be wavy fronts and storms, and here it's going to get very warm and very stormy.
Wet and
it's stormy. It's supposed to happen. So, and that might affect our coming guests, and I'll get into that, and then we'll get into where everybody can find anybody, and where they can send their emails of their angry comments to Henry. But going to our guests for the coming weeks, John Wetter is going to be on next week. We'll talk about the Twin Cities outbreak. That's pending he's not going out and chasing tornadoes or whatnot, because the weather is going to be maybe a bit active next week, so we'll have to wait and see, so stay tuned. After that, Jeff Baskin from KLRT in Little Rock, Arkansas will be on. We'll probably talk about several tornado outbreaks, several interesting weather events that occurred in Arkansas. And then we get into the 3 shows that we have booked in the last week. We are so excited. May 22nd, this is a guest that Henry and I both booked, although JP thinks that I did it, but it was actually Henry. James Paul Dice, who's at WBRC in Birmingham. We'll be talking about all the stuff in Alabama. We're going to talk about April 27th again. Sorry for those people who are sick and tired of us talking about April 27th, 2011, but we're going to talk about it probably again. We'll probably also talk about April 28th last year, which we have not talked about yet, except with Matt Lobhan, who was in Tupelo. And I will notice, this is another shout-out I'm going to do. I'm crazy because I'm doing this. Matt Lobhan, who is famous for being the one to evacuate his studio from the tornado last year in Tupelo, he finally put the entire coverage that he did that day, he put it on YouTube on the 1-year anniversary, and I watched it all, and I ended up staying up until 6 in the morning one night earlier this week watching it. So I'm going to blame him for me staying up till 6 in the morning. And the funny thing happened. I don't know, and I might ask Eric if this happens at his workplace. When the tornado hit, they lost power, so they had no internet, nothing. They could not get radar, no warnings, nothing. He called the weather service in Memphis to get the warnings. And they had, and on a phone, they were able to get cell coverage. I don't know how they did this. Put the phone up to his mic, and this woman pretty much told him the warnings, what was in effect, blah, 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 blah. They did that for 45 minutes, and I thought that was kind of interesting. But I digress.
Interesting improvisation, for sure.
Yeah, and I thought that was interesting. And then we go on to May 29th. Sorry, Henry, and then we can go into the outro. Steve Hilberg from the Midwest, who's the former director of the Midwestern Regional Climate Center, will be on. So we're going to talk about that, and he was involved in a study that was done in the 70s in and around St. Louis. We'll talk about that. And just booked today, Dave Spielman, known as Doppler Dave Spielman, from KVIA in El Paso, Texas. So that'll be interesting because he's so close to Mexico. So we'll probably talk about weather in and around El Paso and maybe how boring it is there, because nothing, the biggest thing that happens there more than likely is a dust storm.
Yeah.
So, and we'll have a couple of other guests that we're kind of waiting for answers on from the higher ups and whatnot. So, Henry, do you want to do the where anybody can find us?
Yeah,
I'll ask Eric where anybody can find him, and then you can go from there.
Well, one thing before we go here, I will note that I'm reading Eric's bio here, and I do share a few favorite bands with him. So I mean, we got that in common. I'm a big Muse and Arcade Fire fan. So,
nice.
And I offer my sincere condolences for being a Cleveland Browns fan. I know it's
Cleveland sports in general, it's a vast wasteland of despair.
At least you got LeBron. At least you got LeBron back.
True.
That's the big thing. They're doing pretty well. Anyway, back to what we were saying. Just to summarize what Jeff said, John Wetter on May 8th, Jeff Baskin from WKLRT on May 15th, JP Dice from WBRC on May 22nd, Steve Heelberg from MRCC on May 29th, and then Dave Spielman, of course, from KVIA on June 5th. So, hey, that's going out to show 62. And then we'll have 3 more shows to fill before we have our short July 3rd intermission there. And then, of course, we have our Oklahoma Outbreak series, which Jeff...
That's our. I named that because that's when Henry and I, the two people that are on here with you, Eric, will be at NWA in Oklahoma City.
Which brings up the question: will you be at NWA?
I haven't decided yet. I'm going to AMS, the Broadcaster Conference in June, and I'm not sure about NWA yet.
You gotta go.
He's going to be in with the big wigs in Raleigh with Nate.
That's right.
A former guest on our program. He was our guest in his car.
In his car, nice.
Not as bad as Matt Lobhon, who actually was also in his car. That show started. We're on live. Matt Lobhon's show started with him at the Taco Bell drive-thru. We don't care where we start shows. We'll start them anywhere.
Why not?
But anyway, so
before we get to contact information, it's interesting to note Nate's show was 1 year ago yesterday. So we've enjoyed our fair share of shows. We're out to 62. Nothing compared to some of the other shows, but hey, that's pretty good for us. Anyway, contact information. Polygon is on every Friday night around 7 o'clock, depending on how well Google wants to work. You can find us at polygon.iowawx.tv. The archive shows are wherever Jeff felt like storing them.
They're on my. Well, some of them I gotta put the ones that you did off yours, Henry, onto the Polygon channel that's off my YouTube channel. I send that now to all people I email to possibly be guests, so it's there. Or do I send the intro? I send something. The intro. I send the intro stuff, which I never use on here. Which I spent 2 hours doing that because I had to put in all the guests. So Eric's lovely face is going to be now in that intro when I get a chance to redo it again. Unfortunately, the last time I did it was after Dave Nussbaum 2 weeks ago, so darn, it'll probably be at least 3 months before Eric's fine face will be on there. So, but yeah,
anyway,
you can...
Contact information, the Iowa Weather Network, iawx.net. Okay, I got to remember this because this is like scripted for me. You can contact Jeff at IowaWX. You can email him at jeff.wilcox@iawx.net. You can contact me. I'm on Twitter at HenryC_weather_WX. It's not Henry Clucker as some people have. It's Henry C.
That's it. He's running from the police.
And my email is henry.luker@iawx.net. Eric, how can they contact you?
All right, on Twitter, I am Eric, ERICWFMJ, and Twitter is the preferred way of talking with me. I'm on Twitter all the time. I think it's about 1 million times better than Facebook. But if you want to find my professional page on Facebook, put meteorologist in front of my name, Eric, ERIC. Last name is WILHELM, and hope to see everyone on the internets. I post, of course, a lot about Eastern Ohio and Western PA weather, but especially on Twitter, I post a lot about national stuff and astronomy and other stuff too.
Yeah.
So, unless Jeff, if you have anything else to say.
Nope.
All right, so I think that will end the show tonight. Thank you, Eric, very much for being on. We definitely really appreciate it. Go and enjoy the presumably warm weather outside if the conditions are anything similar to what's outside here. But anyway, that's our show tonight. Thank you again for watching. Have a great weekend, and God bless.